My name is Harold Crane. I am 82 years old. I am speaking softly because the house is asleep, and because I am not sure how much longer my voice will sound like my own. There is a cup of cold tea beside me. I keep forgetting to drink it.
The clock on the wall has been ticking longer than my marriage lasted, longer than my children stayed home, longer than my mother's footsteps echoed in this hallway. It keeps going, indifferent to everything I have lost. Sometimes I wish it would stop, just so I could feel what silence truly means. I was born in a small house that smelled like boiled potatoes and coal smoke. My father worked nights, my mother worked mornings, and I worked to stay out of their way. I learned early that love arrived quietly and left without warning. When I was a boy, I used to sit on the front steps and count passing cars, believing that if I paid enough attention, nothing important would slip past me. I was wrong. Life slipped past me anyway. At 17, I stood at a train station with a suitcase that was too big for me and a heart that pretended it was brave. My mother held my face in both her hands and looked at me like she already knew she wouldn't see the same boy again. I remember the way her thumbs trembled. I remember how I pulled away first. I told myself I had to go, that this was just what men did. I did not stay long enough to see her cry. Years later, I would learn that she stood there until the platform emptied, until the wind carried away the sound of the train, until the last trace of me was gone. I did not know that then. I built a life in another city, careful, ordinary, respectable. I married a woman named Evelyn, who smelled like lavender and disappointment. We were good at pretending. At night, we lay beside each other without touching, listening to the refrigerator hum, listening to our breathing fall out of rhythm. I told myself this was what stability felt like.
Our first child arrived on a rainy afternoon. I held him in my arms and felt something heavy press into my chest, something I could not name. I went back to work the next morning. When he cried at night, I rolled to the other side of the bed and let Evelyn handle it. I convinced myself that providing was enough, that presence was optional. Years passed like that, days stacked neatly but hollow. There is one memory that has stayed with me longer than any other. My son was 8. We were at a lake. The sun was bright, too bright, and he asked me to teach him to skip stones. I stood behind him, my hands on his shoulders, trying to guide his arm the way my father had once guided mine. He kept missing. The stones sank straight down, one after another. He turned to me, eyes searching, not for technique, but for something warmer. I pulled my hands back. I told him to practice. I walked away. I watched him from a distance as he kept throwing stones that disappeared into the water, as if they were never meant to be seen. That was the first day I felt something crack inside me, though I didn't recognize it as such. Back then I called it frustration. Now I know it was regret, arriving early and finding no place to sit. When my mother died, I arrived 2 days late. Snow covered the driveway, and the house smelled like empty rooms. Her rocking chair was still moving slightly, as if she had just stepped away. I stood in her kitchen and realized I could not remember the sound of her laugh. That frightened me more than her absence.
I buried my face in my hands and felt time press down on me like a slow, patient weight, but I still did not understand it. I went back to my life. I went back to work, to bills, to small arguments with Evelyn about groceries and curtains and who forgot to turn off the lights. I told myself there would be time later to sit quietly with my memories. There was always later. And later kept stretching, thin and distant, until it was no longer something I could reach. My children grew taller than me. They learned to speak in shorter sentences when they talked to me. They called less. I noticed it, but I did not move toward them. I stayed where I was, convinced that if I remained steady, everything else would return on its own. It did not. One winter evening, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug, staring at the steam as if it were carrying messages she could no longer read. She said my name quietly, Harold. I looked up, annoyed that she had interrupted my thoughts. She told me she felt lonely, not alone in the house, lonely with me. I laughed it off, made a joke, asked what she wanted me to do about it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood, carried her mug to the sink, and rinsed it without drinking. That was the night something shifted, though I pretended not to feel it. I woke before dawn and watched her sleep, noticing for the first time how small she looked, how tired her face had become, how much of her life she had spent waiting for me to notice her. I wanted to reach for her. I did not. I turned away instead. The clock kept ticking. Outside, a truck passed on the highway, its headlights briefly painting the wall in long, pale stripes. Inside me, something waited, quiet, insistent, unresolved. And still I told myself there would be time to speak, time to sit, time to finally feel what I had been avoiding. I believed that with the stubbornness of a young man, even though I was no longer young, even though the weight was already there, pressing gently but steadily on my chest. I did not yet know how heavy it would become. I only felt its first shadow, faint, uneasy, impossible to ignore. I set my hand flat on the table and listened to the house breathe around me. And for the first time in many years, I did not move.
Years moved the way winter does, slowly at first, and then all at once. Evelyn and I grew quieter with each other, not in peace, but in habit. Our words shrank to practical things, bills, groceries, doctor appointments, weather. At night, I would hear her breathing turn shallow, then steady, and I would lie awake listening to the space between us. Sometimes I reached my hand across the mattress, hovering just above her shoulder, afraid that if I touched her, I would have to face everything I had left unsaid. Most nights, I let my hand fall back to my own side. Time kept stacking itself around us like furniture we never moved. Then came the morning the house felt different. I remember the light being too clean, too sharp, as if it had scrubbed the air overnight. Evelyn did not get out of bed. I sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, feeling ridiculous for noticing it so carefully, as if the rhythm itself were a fragile thing I might break. The doctor came later, calm, efficient, gentle in a way that made the room feel unbearably small. When they took her away, I stood in the doorway holding her robe, still warm from where she had worn it the night before. That was when the weight arrived in full. Not as grief, at least not only that. It was the weight of all the moments I had let pass without touching them, the weight of mornings I had spent in silence instead of saying her name,
the weight of dinners eaten without looking at her face, the weight of every time I had chosen comfort over closeness. I moved through the house like a stranger after that. Her teacup sat on the counter for days. I washed it, then put it back in the same place, as if I were afraid to disturb the memory of her hands.
At night, I began to sit in the dark living room and listen. I listened to the floorboards creak, to the pipes sigh, to the faint hum of the refrigerator, to the distant cars on the highway. I listened for footsteps that were never coming. In that silence, memories started arriving without asking permission. My son at the lake, his small hand gripping the stone, his face turning toward me, waiting. My mother on the train platform, her thumbs trembling against my cheeks. Evelyn at the kitchen table, staring into her tea, saying my name as if it might slip away. I did not try to chase these memories. I let them sit beside me like old companions who had been waiting a long time. And slowly, almost without noticing, I began to feel time differently, not as something ahead of me anymore, but as something behind me, layered, dense, alive with what I had missed. I walked through the house, touching door frames, chair backs, window sills, as if the wood itself might remember me better than I remembered myself. Some afternoons I drove past the lake. I never stopped. I just let it pass by the window, the water flat and patient, swallowing stones I could no longer throw. I started writing letters I knew I would never send, to my children, to my mother, to Evelyn, even to the younger version of myself who thought he had all the years in the world. I did not try to apologize in those letters. I simply described small things, the way light fell on the table, the way silence settled after a storm, the way a hand feels when it rests too long without being held. That was enough. Now, at 82, I move slowly through my days, careful not to rush, not because I have learned some great truth, but because rushing feels like another kind of loss. The clock still ticks, the tea still goes cold. Sometimes I sit for long stretches without thinking at all, just feeling the air move in and out of my chest. There is no bright revelation waiting for me, no tidy ending, only the quiet knowledge that time was never something I could control. It was something I had to live inside, and I lived inside it half awake. Some evenings I imagine Evelyn in the next room, humming to herself the way she used to, though I know the house is empty. The thought does not comfort me. It simply sits with me, heavy, gentle, unmistakable. If you are still here with me, I wonder what this weight feels like to you. Maybe you feel it too, in some small, ordinary corner of your life. You don't have to say anything. You could just stay with the silence for a moment, or leave a few words if they come quietly. I will be here for a while longer, listening to the clock and to whatever memories choose to visit before it grows too late.